It's great to join everybody, even if it's virtually, but still good to be with you for your afternoon, my morning. As you'll have gathered from the kind introduction, I'm not actually a UBC alumna, so I'm sort of crashing the party here. I'm from the rival. I'm from U of T, but I did do my studies were a combination of archaeology, anthropology, and Asian studies, with a particular focus on Mandarin. So I do have a background which is maybe somewhat similar to some of you who are joining us today. I know that what interests many people when I speak to students in Canada, usually what everyone wants to know about is, how do I get into global affairs? And I am going to talk about a career in diplomacy and in global affairs in a few minutes. But before I get to that, I just wanted to offer maybe a couple of more general thoughts for those of you who are in the position of thinking about, what do I do next? What do I do with my life? Which is always a very difficult, I think, moment for most people, at least, is quite challenging to be at that point. And all the more so right now. I mean, in the midst of a global pandemic, with all of the concerns that we have around climate change and other related concerns, I'm sure it feels like a very difficult time to be thinking, what do I do next? So I just wanted to start off with maybe a little bit of advice, if I can, and partly from looking back at my own experience when I was at that point in my life. So advice to be optimistic, to be flexible, and to bring your best self to this process of choosing a career. Optimistic in part because I know this is may seem like a rather difficult time to be launching out post-degree, but I certainly experienced something not the same, but similar, in that I graduated into the midst of one of the worst recessions that Canada experienced. I think up there with the Great Depression of the 30s and the 2008 financial crisis. The other really bad dip in the Canadian economy was around the time I graduated in the 1980s. So things weren't looking very bright then. So what did I do? I went on into graduate studies. Hoping that would, both because of my interest, but also hoping that would lead me in interesting directions. Now, in the end, I went as far as a doctorate in my field, so in East Asian archaeology, and only in the latter stages of that decided that I maybe wasn't cut out to be an academic, which is where that path would normally lead you. And so at that point decided, well, if I'm not sure about that, this is the moment to try and see if I want to do something else. So in my late 20s, coming out of a doctorate, sat the Foreign Service exam and got in. And here I am 30 years later. And a lot of people remark on the fact that I have this very strange background for a diplomat. Not many people have a background in archaeology. But I have to say, for me, that was a bit of a lesson in the importance of being flexible, a little bit around just serendipity, that sometimes things work out the right way, even if they aren't quite planned. And also, and maybe above all, that unexpected backgrounds can bring really useful things to a job. And I think that the knowledge I have of the deep history and cultural roots of some parts of Asia have actually been really useful to me in many of my jobs. And if nothing else, in my current job in Thailand, that one of the things that's a real door opener for me with many ties in senior position is the fact that my first experience of Thailand was working on excavations out in the countryside as a student. And so I experienced a bit of Thailand and a time, if you like, in Thailand's past that's now gone. And that kind of gives me a connection with people here. So all that to say, I think it's important to be flexible and not to feel that your studies lock you into a particular path. And I have to say, the other reasons I'm optimistic is because I see, despite the current difficulties, a big wave building of desire to, as the saying has it, to build back better. And I'm really impressed at the way many students and other young people are really bringing their best selves to that and are tackling these problems in a much more, I think, sophisticated way with a much more global outlook than certainly I had when I was young. And I see that in my own kids who are just finishing up their high school studies and moving on into university. So that's my sort of my broad general advice. My second piece of advice is one you've all already taken, which is choose Asia. When I started focusing on China and learning Mandarin, back in the 1980s, it was a pretty unusual thing to do. There weren't that many people learning Mandarin, except those who were of Chinese origin themselves, and so had a kind of a family link there. And a lot of people asked me, why are you doing this? Why are you interested? And of course, then 20 and 25 years on, when I was serving and posted in China, nobody asked me, why did you do Mandarin? Why did you learn it? Why did you pick, why did you get interested in Asia? So I like to pretend it was because I had, huge foresight and that this was all carefully planned. But in fact, it was really just personal interest. But the reality of Asia sort of caught up with me and has caught up with all of us, which is that the tremendous growth in Asia has made it now, once again, one of the most important regions in the world, particularly economically, but not just that. And a lot of other things come with that economic power. So you're already, for me, focusing on what's one of already the most important regions of the world, and one that's going to continue to be of great and increasing importance. And one of the things that's often concerned me a little bit in my career is that not enough Canadians actually know about Asia in depth and understand Asian cultures and societies. I think the West Coast and UBC and of course the center are maybe the wonderful exception to that rule. But for someone like me who comes from central Canada and who works when I'm back in headquarters in Ottawa, it really scares me that we have very, very few people at senior levels of the public service who really know and understand and have spent time in Asia. And I think that's a huge gap. And it's a gap that I hope many of you will be able to help fill in your careers. So you're already off to a very good start right there. So finally, I will get to the thing, as I said, I'm sure many of you are interested in, which is about a career in international affairs or in diplomacy. And I had just 3 or 4 quick points I wanted to make on that. The first is, when I sat the Foreign Service exam, there wasn't as wide a range of options for international careers. I mean, basically, if you wanted to do something international in the federal government, it was mainly the Foreign Service. And there weren't many other really viable long-term jobs in, say, civil society, other parts of government that were wholly internationally focused. And that's one of the things that's changed the most during my career. So I always encourage people, but by all means, sit the Foreign Service exam, but don't just think about that, because there's a whole range of careers in international organizations, increasingly in international civil society, especially in academia, in business, in other parts of government. And many government departments now at the federal and provincial levels have people who specialize in international relations. So there's a very wide range of different jobs which will be international careers. So think widely. Don't just look at the Foreign Service exam as the one door to go through. So that's my first point. My second point is just a very practical one. If you are looking at the Foreign Service itself, the Canadian Foreign Service, I know one of the frustrations for some people has been that we have not been hiring in recent years, or our hiring has been very patchy. And I can't make you any absolute guarantees. I don't run the human resources part of it, but what I have seen is an effort to have a more planned, sustainable approach. And part of that approach includes running the exam and hiring people, if not every year, then at least on a regular basis in the next few years. So that's good news for those of you who are interested in trying that doorway into an international career. My third piece of advice on a career in diplomacy is or an international career more generally, is it's not just a career, it's your life. And so one thing you really need to think about if you're interested in going into, again, the Foreign Service, but also international organizations, international NGOs, is for many of us, that means a career either living long-term outside of Canada or moving very frequently. And I know if you're young and unencumbered, you tend to just think about the job and not about the life part of it. But for us in the Foreign Service, it continues to mean a challenge, much as we may love the job, in that our spouses, our kids, the whole household, our cats and dogs and everybody have to uproot themselves every 3 or 4 years and move. And for our spouses, that can mean huge disruptions to career. For our kids, it's meaning being willing to and able to change schools every few years. Now, there are many upsides to it as well, obviously, but still, I think people sometimes don't think enough about what the implications are for this job, and actually for many jobs, more about what's it going to be like for me to live this job, not just to do it. So I do encourage people to think about that a bit. And if you think about it and say, well, actually, I don't think I'd feel comfortable with that pattern, then to look at, there are also many jobs where you could be, say, based in Canada or based somewhere else on a more permanent basis, but you're still working on international issues. And so that's kind of a big divide, if you like, in lifestyle, which is worth thinking about. And I think I'll end on sort of the upsides and downsides, if you like, of the job itself. So being a diplomat, being in international diplomacy. It's in many ways a wonderful job. Obviously, I've stayed with it through a long career and really enjoyed it. I have spent some time outside of the Foreign Service and in other parts of government, but most of my career in diplomacy. I'd say for me, the best parts of it are, one, the living abroad and getting to, for long enough, you get to really experience and get to know another culture. That you do a huge range of things. It's very variable, and that you get to represent Canada, which is wonderful and is a privilege we don't always really appreciate when we're in Canada itself. So those are all, for me, the positives of the job. Depending on your perspective, though, for some people, it's maybe frustrating that you don't entirely get to specialize. Or at least sometimes there's a tension in the career between specialization and career advancement, that if you want to advance, you often have to be more of a generalist. Again, that you have to, the great part is living abroad, the bad part is moving often. And finally, and again, something people don't always think of in terms of a career, any public service career, is you don't speak for yourself. You speak for Canada. And in an era when we're all on social media and all used to expressing our opinions there, that takes a certain discipline, and it's not something for everybody. And it's a very different thing, for example, from an academic career where your whole reputation is about your personal thoughts and ideas, so on. But in government, you're about expressing the views of your government, which sometimes you may not agree with. So that also is something that's a constraint of the job that you have to think about. But again, even within those constraints, it's a wonderful and fascinating career. It allows you to do a whole range of things, and I have hugely enjoyed it and continue to enjoy it. So I would certainly encourage you to consider, whether it's formally through the Foreign Service, but through some of these other avenues I've mentioned, to think about international careers, and also to think about all that you can draw from that and bring back to help spread the news, if you like, and spread knowledge about Asia within Canada. So I'll stop there to leave some time for questions, and happy to answer some questions and to talk a bit further on anything anybody wants to raise. Thanks. I started studying Mandarin, and I think the two things that piqued my interest on China. One was that around the time I was at university was a time when there was sort of a new wave of archaeological finds from China that were being publicized, and there was an exhibit that was traveling around the world. So from the perspective of someone studying archaeology, it seemed like a fascinating area. And then also the the East Asian Studies program at U of T gave these sort of open lectures that anyone could go to. And I went to one about Confucianism and was really fascinated in sort of what it showed about Chinese thinking and Chinese society. And so I thought, well, I'll just try Mandarin and see what it's like. So in my second year, I took first year Mandarin and I was hooked. That was it. So and some of that is because I think when you learn a language that for someone, obviously, I grew up speaking English and French, and so for someone coming from European languages, to learn a language like Mandarin, it's so different. You're not just learning a different vocabulary, you're learning a different way of thinking about language. And I think partly that was what really hooked me on it. And so off I went. And then when I got into graduate studies, I then sort of shifted direction a little and started focusing more on Japanese. After I graduated, I got a scholarship, which actually still exists, and I encourage any of your students who are studying Chinese to think about it. So the government of Canada has a scholarship which dates back from the time when we established diplomatic relations with China. It's called the Canada-China Scholars Exchange Program, and it sends graduate students, including those who've just completed a BA but aren't yet in a full graduate program, and university lecturers on exchanges between China and Canada. So I applied for and got that scholarship and went and spent a year at Beijing University at Beida, which is where I met Richard Liu, or through that connection, rather, I met Richard. He's much, I'm aging him. He's much younger than me. He was at Beida later than me, but we're both Beida alumni. So I went and spent a year as an exchange student at Beida, which was, I wouldn't say was easy, especially at the time. I mean, this was still relatively soon after China had opened back up to allowing many foreign students in. But it was fascinating. And it gave me a perspective on China that has been useful to me throughout my career. And I should say, I mean, I directed a lot of my remarks maybe more towards Canadian students, but for international students as well, I think a lot of what I said holds, even if you're not looking at joining the Canadian public service. I would say, I guess, maybe two areas where I see a lot of scope for expansion. One is in trade and economic relations more broadly, because the economies of most of the Southeast Asian countries are continuing to grow. And I think one of the big efforts Canada's trying to do is diversify its trading relationships. That for a while now, we've realized we're too concentrated in two big markets, the US and China, and that we need to be more diversified. And so we're a big focus on trying to build those relationships. And that's partly through the business community itself, but it's also through different government and semi-official bodies that help to work on that. So also in areas like free trade negotiations. We're hoping maybe that we can launch free trade negotiations with ASEAN as a whole. So that's one area. And there are a lot of other areas of sort of facilitating and empowering trade and economic relations, if you like. So that's sort of the big piece. One very specific area, actually, and it would be very germane to you and others here, where I think we need to do more is education. I think education is doubly important because it's both an economic tie, so it's an important source of income for universities like UBC. And it brings something to the Canadian economy. But much more important than that is the personal connections it creates. And I myself experienced that. I was just talking about that when you go and study in another country, it's not just, oh, I get the benefit of the studying or the degree. You really get to know the other country in a way you wouldn't otherwise. And I think that stays with you for life. And usually, I hope, means it creates also a a personal tie of friendship and of understanding. So for me, education is sort of the superpower sector, if you like. I mean, we do consider it in the trade and economic work we do in the MC, we consider it an economics or trade sector. But for me, it's way, way more than that. And we have a very good history there, because when we had development assistance, which we still have with some countries in Southeast Asia, but many countries like Thailand have already graduated from development assistance. But a lot of our past assistance was initially focused around education, and especially university education. So there are a lot of universities in Thailand and in Vietnam, in China, in other parts of the region, who have really strong ties to a Canadian university and maybe, built up their curriculum in certain subjects with the help of our development assistance agency and of a Canadian university. So there are already those really strong links. And then I think if you can build on those, that for me, education is definitely one of the areas we could do way more. And I saw a statistic recently that I think it's 16% of Thai students go to study in Australia, and only 4% go to study in Canada. So I thought, okay, that's not good, because Australia is sort of our benchmark. That's not good. The Australians are beating us badly. So we really need to work on that and try and get more Thais and more other students from Southeast Asia to think of Canada as a place to study. So I hope you can help us with that. So my son is here with us in Thailand. My daughter's back in Canada. She just almost completed high school. It's interesting. They're both very interested in politics and sort of politically aware, I'd say. My son who's here is also very interested in art. He's I'm not sure if he sees a career as an artist per se, but I think he's quite interested in sort of the intersection between art and politics and political activism. Which is an interesting space to be in, especially now that so many conversations happen online. I think particularly for his generation, that being able to express things in visual, digital format is really important. So there's, as I said, there's kind of that interesting crossover between the arts and sort of the digital space and political space, and all the more so, I think, also because there's people doing things sort of collectively, because online you can ask people to contribute. There's one project he's sort of joined in on where someone is creating virtual worlds online and asking others to contribute some of the artwork because there are visuals of this virtual world online. So I find all of that really interesting. I mean, it's a sort of totally different space from what I grew up with. But it's another one of those things that makes me optimistic about, trying to tackle some of the challenges we face in very new and creative ways. Okay, there wasn't actually much of a gap there. I sat the Foreign Service exam, I completed my PhD in 1990. I sat the Foreign Service exam, I think the year before that, because as I said, as I was getting towards the end of it, I was already thinking, not sure I'm the person who's cut out to be an academic. So I sat the exam in I guess it would be 1989, was accepted in 1990. And actually, the problem was not so much a gap as not enough gap, because like many people who've done a doctorate, you'll relate to this, my finish date for my thesis kind of kept getting later and later and later. And so the gap between that and the start date that I had given to join the Foreign Service kept getting shorter and shorter and shorter. So I really kind of squeaked in under the wire. And the original plan I had, which was that I would have this nice break between the two, didn't happen. So I didn't have much gap. I would say, on a more serious note, I know one thing that's frustrating for some people who sit the Foreign Service exam or some of the other public service job processes in Canada is they are slow. And so it takes a long time to get an answer. And I know that for some people, you can't afford to wait around, especially people if you're carrying a lot of student debt, and so I know that can be a bit of a disincentive for people to join, that they have to wait so long, not only to hear, but then also to get often the security clearance that you need to join. So again, I know that's not easy for people, and I don't think, unfortunately, that's going to be fixed right away, because if anything, processes have slowed down more because of the pandemic. But I do encourage people in those circumstances to kind of hang in there, if you can, at least. When you're young, a 6-month or 1-year wait may seem like forever, but over the course of a career, it's very short. So it's worth that, hanging in there if you can, to get the job. Because that was actually something I meant to mention before and I forgot. I would put it into a different category. Obviously, it's one of our own languages, one of our 2 national languages, so learning Asian languages is important. But for me, being able to some degree, at least, to speak both French and English is part of being Canadian. And I know this view doesn't always make me popular, especially on the west coast of Canada. But for me, if you're serious about joining the Foreign Service, especially, there is a lot of competition. So one of the ways you want to come out on top and beat the competition is being prepared in language terms. And that means having a good level of French. And before anybody kind of complains to me, and because I know people say that's not fair, it advantages people from Quebec and Ontario and so on. But if you want to join the State Department in the US, and remember, the US is a unilingual English country officially, you have to have, I think it's at least 2 other languages beyond English before they'll even look at you. Because it's just considered, it's a necessary tool for an international career. So for me, if you're serious about joining any part of the federal public service, not all jobs in the federal public service require you to be bilingual, but many do, and the Foreign Service does. If you're serious, learn French. And there are lots of great ways you can do that. And just because you're in BC or somewhere else, it's still possible. I mean, if my Nova Scotian brother-in-law, who spent his life in Newfoundland and who was a provincial court judge and decided he needed French because, I mean, he didn't need it for the job, but he decided to be a good, Canadian public servant, he needed French, and he managed to learn it. So in middle age in Newfoundland, if he can do it, you guys, students, it will be a piece of cake. So that's my advice on French. Good question. So from a language perspective, there are some places that have really good Mandarin programs. I mean, if the focus is language, Middlebury College in the US, and I did some of my Mandarin training at the Chinese University of Hong Kong, which was also an excellent program. And I know there are some very good programs in Taiwan. And of course, there are the exchanges with Beijing University and a number of other universities in China. Some of those programs are quite expensive. That's the only drawback. For instance, Middlebury is wonderful, but unless you get a scholarship, it's pricey. I think my strongest recommendation would be from the language perspective, but also from Foreign Service, international affairs perspective, is try for a program that will allow you to be immersed, if possible, where you're surrounded by the language, because you learn it much better. but at the same time, you're also learning all sorts of other things about the culture and the politics and so on. So I found the time I spent at the Chinese University of Hong Kong was great because I wasn't just learning Mandarin, I was also absorbing lots about what was happening in China. And I did that just before posting in China, so I could really hit the ground running. So I recommend those. And also when I learned Japanese, I actually did it in a program that included a homestay segment. And that was, I mean, it's hard work, but it was terrific because I would learn Japanese in the day and then go home and use what I'd learned at night. And so if you really want to make the language stick, that's good. And I guess I would also say my experience was that sort of experience of living in one of the countries that you want to know about, or a culture you want to know about, is really valuable, and in many ways is more valuable than the sort of formal learning that you would do if you went to take, you know, a master's in international relations. So no disrespect to IR programs, but for me, the language and the experience is very important, and is something that's much easier to get also when you're young. And you know, your brain is better wired to picking up language. And then the more formal international relations part of it, you can always kind of come back and do at a later date. And maybe as a very last thought, I know, you know, study in China has its ups and downs. And certainly for me, as I said, it wasn't always an easy experience, but it was a very fascinating one. And there are a number of programs now at Chinese universities that are geared to international students. So I think, just trying to remember now, and I'm a little out of date on this, but I think, for instance, either Beida or Renda does a master's in public policy. That is taught in English, so you don't have to have a super level of Mandarin, but you're there in China on a Chinese campus. And so you can do the language studies along with that. So that's another option to consider, because it gives you both the language, the experience, and also a bit more of the sort of more formal teaching around public policy.
Sounds good. Excellent, Kevin. I think this is actually the perfect question to start off career night. And I'm happy to know that you have already begun planning for your career this early. It's very nice. And I also think you have raised actually a very good question, because you'll find that this is actually a long-standing question, not just for Asian studies students, but rather for most disciplines within the arts faculty. To answer your concern, I think we have to first understand the difference between knowledge and skill set when it comes to establishing one's career. Now, a skill set, I would most likely define it as something that is directly associated to a career, meaning that you need certain skill sets to perform certain jobs. So the skill sets and the career actually share very similar names. So for example, if you study mining engineering, and you'll most likely become a mining engineer, or you learn about accounting at school, and then you become an accountant. A lot of students actually like to go for these fields, especially in commerce and engineering, because it doesn't take much to figure out the relationship between the skill set you learn and the job that you do. So it's a good sense of security, I would say. Now, for Asian studies students and many art students, this is entirely a different story, because what we spend most of our time learning is actually knowledge rather than a specific skill set. Now, from a career perspective, unless you're in the field of education, whose job is to teach knowledge or to uncover more knowledge through research, knowledge is more like useful background information that can help you do well in a job or give you an advantage at a certain job. But you see, you won't directly be able to find a job that is associated with it. So this means that to make use of knowledge, you often need to have a skill set that goes along with it to make it really powerful. So for example, Kevin, what is your area of focus in the Asian studies? Well, that's great because that is actually my area of focus. We're quite similar. So mine was actually the development of Japanese economy and the political relationship between China and Japan. So you see, the funny thing is, even up until these days, I can easily recall that, random facts. The first Sino-Japanese War ended in 1895, and the reasons why Japan's economy has been stuck for a long time for the past 2 decades. Now, I'm pretty sure that you also have some of these facts and dates stuck in your head too. But you see, no one's actually going to hire us or offer me a job just because I know these facts, especially when we're now in the digital age where anyone can just simply look up anything on the internet for 2 seconds. So back to what I was saying earlier, if you expect that knowledge can directly help you land on the job, I think you will often be disappointed. However, what I can assure you is that when knowledge is being combined with the right skill, there will be more opportunities waiting for you, and you will often outperform those peers who only have the skill but not the knowledge. So I'd like to share a very quick example with you of mine. So, like I mentioned earlier, I'm also the CEO of an international real estate development company operating in Japan. Now, what we do over there is actually a pretty new business model that stemmed from the idea of globalization and urbanization. So now in Japan, there are a lot of properties in smaller towns and villages that are known as zero-yen properties, meaning that they're up for sale for 0 yen. Yen is the Japanese currency, and these properties are literally being given away for free or for a very, very low price. Now, the reason to this is because many of these properties, they are actually inheritance, and the older generation owners are now passing away, and their new owners are normally in their 30s or 40s, and they're mostly white-collar workers who came from these smaller towns and villages, and they're living now in big cities such as Tokyo and Osaka with their nuclear families. So with their inheritance properties in distant places, they really have no use for it. And they don't want it as vacation houses either, because many of these properties are nearly 70, 80 years old, and they're in very, very bad shape. However, the owners still have to pay different forms of taxes and insurances on them, which makes them a liability rather than an asset. So what my company does over there is to buy these up, we fix them up very nicely, and we even rebuild them in some cases. And then we sell it off to three groups: investors from Russia, China, Singapore, international buyers who really like Japanese culture so much that they want a vacation house in Japan, and expats from Europe, usually young people in Italy, who come to Japan to start a new life because of the cheaper living experience expenses in the countryside. Now, as for the Japanese, we help them get rid of this liability, and for local governments, we actually help them transform the city and attract investment and population, which is what they desperately need because Japan's countryside is losing so much of its population to the big cities. So we create a win-win-win situation. Now, Kevin, you see, this business model has been highly successful, but none of it it's actually possible without the knowledge I was talking about earlier. The skills that I use to do this job could be marketing technique or asset evaluation, but we can hire people to do that. But the real important thing is knowledge in Japanese culture, economics, as well as the impact of globalization and urbanization on the Japanese society. So when you take all these together, you can actually make a business out of it. So in conclusion, I would really say that knowledge is the more profound side because it supports you in logic, communication, generating idea, understanding the market, which is what people want and what people need. So uh, I would say this is more important than a skill set. It takes you time to learn that knowledge, and once you can find a skill set to go along with it, to accompany it, then you might have a really, really nice business model or to land on the job to give you a advantage in your future career. That would basically be my perspective on this.
Yeah, well, actually, I kind of want to compliment Paul's answer there, since that we're on this virtual panel. So Kevin, is a very interesting question. In addition to the knowledge and everything there, I think the other part is your relationships that you have in your community, in your, as I said earlier, in the global village. When you're over, say, for example, in your area that you want to go visit, you're going to go study, you're going to be building your own network. And you'll be surprised what happens when you grow through that development phase of, if you're deciding to go study in a place, say you're learning Mandarin, your peers are around you, they're going to be learning and they're also growing at the same time. And then you'll be surprised to see what happens of the people you meet in that specific country, in a specific city. For example, I happen to be studying at Peking University, and one of my friends invited me to this TV studio. I never thought about film or anything like that, or that industry. Yeah, he invited me. He's a big name director, and I ended up being in this small TV series. Who I ended up meeting this one guy, and this guy invited me to be an assistant, production assistant on the set of this television commercial. And I ended up doing this commercial for Ford Motors. And I never thought I'd be doing something behind the scenes. I love being behind the scenes. I really don't like being in front. So I ended up having this really unique experience of shooting you can see it on YouTube. It's actually the Farewell to the Millennia. It was shot in '99 and shown in 2000. And the producer happened to be filming, wanting a group to film in China. I happened to be there. I happened to have the language skill sets. I was thrilled. I had a lot of free time. I was in between stuff. And I said, yeah, I'll spend some time with you on this. And it was a great experience. But that gave me a chance to kind of see what it was like behind in the film and commercial industry. But really wasn't something I wanted to do, but gave me that taste of that industry. So you're young, you got a lot of time ahead of you. Don't put yourself on, don't set yourself up so that you're going to not be able to get out of it. But if you're already set on that, go ahead, go with it. Do it well, though. When you go do something that you want to do with that passion, with that knowledge, but also build that relationship around you, because you never know where it's going to lead you, because there's so many paths in your life. And I know I've had many. So, and I still think I still have a lot ahead of me too, as well. So, yeah, I just want to share that quick note there. And if there's any other panelists that want to comment on this as well, go ahead.
Yeah, hi, Richard. Thank you. That's actually a great thing. I mean, like for me, I think my advice is keep an open mind. I think don't have any preconceived notions whether it's good or not until you try it. Because if you try it, then you can tell me why it's good or not. But you never tried it and people say, oh, I don't like it. Why? So I always have that open mind. I love the fact that, Richard said about connections. Build your connections. You never know where they'll lead. Maintain those relationships. Connect with alumni around the world, right? And they'll be the ones that will help you to give you like the warm referrals and give you perspective in whatever country or jobs that may. So those are things that I think it really resonates with me. Keep open mind, connect communities, and then I think to Paul, have the skill set, have the knowledge combined. I mean, you're young, try things, right? You have the luxury of time. And for example, I'll give you an example. I mean, I think language is very important. When I was actually in Hong Kong, I had a friend of mine that was actually in banking, in investment banking. He came from an arts degree. The reason why that bank chose him was because he spoke 3 Asian languages. No one else speaks 3 Asian languages hardly. So he had that advantage. So think of things how you can actually market yourself in a global environment when you actually travel across Asia to work in your next career.
Definitely. Shandama, I think you had your hand up next, if you'd like to jump in.
Yes to everything that both Joseph, Richard, and Paul just said. I was in your exact same position in not 2 years ago. That was not 2 years ago. 2018 was not 2 years ago. Wow. Sorry, I just had a age crisis there. In 2018, I was in the exact same position. I had focused really specifically on South Asian and Southeast Asian studies, but I did not really know what I wanted to do. I had just received a taste of working at a university as a program assistant for the South Asia Research Center. And immediately after graduation, I got to work with Sloan actually and Adish and helping out the World Sanskrit Conference. So I think my key takeaway from that period of time was always to say yes, but also recognizing that higher education or university, working in university has actually opened my eyes and given me many opportunities to work in multiple different fields within the university itself. So for example, in my day-to-day, I do marketing, communications, and just this upcoming week, I'll be doing a curriculum review project for the School of Computing Science. So just being in higher education has really helped me because I didn't know what I wanted to do after graduation. And by being in higher education, I've further refined what exactly is it that I want to do. Because there's like Paul said, there's a missing piece between the knowledge and the skill set, because it's really hard to connect those two together. But yeah, that was my experience. Higher education was the link for me between working in higher education was the link for me to translating knowledge into skill. And I hope actually to do that continuing on. Yeah. But highly recommend. University is a really good option for you, especially so because they have tuition waivers as well. So if you want to continually upgrade yourself, upgrade your skill set, you are able to for free.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Shandama. And Faze, did you have something to add there?
Yeah, I don't want the careers night to just be one question, so I'll be very brief. But one thing I did want to add is that I find it's really overrated when a lot of students are worried about taking courses that'll give them some hard skills and something that's really marketable. Because after Asian studies, I ended up going to law school, and we took a lot of hard skill classes, like professional classes about legalese in China. And I use my Asian studies soft skills way more than I use those hard skills from law school. So I think it's really overrated when people try to say hard skills are much more valuable than soft skills. It's not that realistic, or as realistic as people think it is.
Just to chime in also that with these paths, like what I said with my intro, was that I really thought I was, going to do one thing, and I kept taking these kind of courses on South Asia, and I was doing better in those. And I had a crisis like in third year where I was trying to fight that and being like, no, I want to focus more on East Asia, and just kind of letting these other experiences through my classes and volunteering, kept leading me elsewhere. And I just kind of went with that, and that worked out really well in the end. Well, it's not the end yet, but so far. And another thing is that when you're in the department, there's lots of things that you can kind of get involved with through volunteering, or if your professors have RA-ships, that you can build some technical skills. So like, to just give an example, I'm doing my PhD at U of T right now. So I'm still in school, like many of you, and I do a lot of language work, but I'm still trying to also build other critical skills that I can take into other jobs, in case if I leave the PhD academia career. And so in RA-ships, I'm learning how to do coding and, you know, typeset books for LaTeX and maintaining websites. And these are just small like things that you can build up. And as you volunteer or get these small jobs, you can build new connections as you're going along with your studies. And you also get to, you know, try out new things. I'm learning a lot about medieval Latin manuscripts through these other RA-ships, which I wouldn't have learned about otherwise. So make use of those opportunities. And yeah, as others have said, failure can also lead to new places. I failed first year Korean, which is part of why I started switching paths. So yeah.
So your question is about deciding between majors based on future career potential. I didn't hear you that well, but that's what I got. Well, I also think this is a really excellent question because it actually comes hand in hand with Kevin's earlier question. To begin with, though, I do feel obliged to say that I do not feel certain knowledge is more important or less diminishing than any other field, because knowledge is about what we know, and all knowledge put together makes up our civilization, as well as who we are and what we know about the world. As for deciding between Asian studies and philosophy, you know, Michael, haven't you thought of why you said you're interested in both and you do pretty well in both of these courses? You see, from my interpretation, I actually feel philosophy and parts of Asian study are actually quite similar in nature, because both of these studies are about cultures, thoughts, and people, and where Western philosophy interprets life, government, and people in a certain way, Asian societies focuses on the same thing, just with a different way of interpretation, such as the heavy influence of Confucianism in East Asia. So to answer your question about a career advantage, like what I've said to Kevin earlier, what you're going to learn from either philosophy or Asian studies are largely going to be similar. They're going to be knowledge-based information. So you will likely have to find another skill set as a tool to put that knowledge to good use. Like one of our panelists earlier was talking about his studies with law. And I think law and Asian studies, they complement each other actually very well. Now, as for making the actual decision, I would definitely lean towards Asian studies because studying Asian studies often requires you to learn at least one Asian language. That is the department requirement. And in our contemporary globalized context, more languages equals to more opportunities, better chances to land on jobs, and more comprehensive set of business models if you choose to start your own business. So simply put, like the language factor that Richard and Joseph was emphasizing earlier, I think really with Asian studies, you're doing two things at once. You're learning about Asian cultural knowledge as well as Asian language knowledge. Versus philosophy, you are doing one thing. So 2 and 1, my favorite would go with Asian studies. That would be my answer to this.
I just cannot emphasize more the importance of language. You know, I've done 5 university degrees. 5. I actually don't really use any of them in what I do right now. But because I studied particularly languages, that led in a complex and a weird and wonderful way to me becoming the first master of wine ever in China. So, you know, I did not study wine at university. I drank a lot, yes, but I did not study wine. And it's those language skills, it's those wonderful skills you get from academic discussion. And, you know, philosophy, I totally understand too, because my other degree was in classics. I particularly love Greek and Latin philosophy. But all of these help you understand the world, and any understanding of the world and ability to make connections will help you find whatever path you end up on. And so, you know, embrace it all and go for the languages though, because that's a remarkable skill. Anyways, yes, starting your own business. I'm probably not the best person to ask about this. But for my sins, I embarked without much knowledge of how complex it would be on opening my own business in Beijing in a field in which no foreigner had actually opened a business in. So in 2017, I opened my company, which is called Dragon Phoenix Wine Consulting, which does wine consulting and wine training for consumers and for other businesses all around China. The one thing I would say that I think was to an advantage in starting a business, particularly in mainland China, is not having done any business outside China. Because one of the great things about Asia, and particularly about mainland China business culture, is that there is a big difference between starting a business here and operating within the legal business scope here that doesn't really exist in the Western world. So in a way, coming to it with the fresh ideas and no preconceptions of contracts and legalities and how things work in the Western law framework was actually very useful to me, because I started as a blank slate and learned as I went along. And this is the one thing I want to emphasize, you know, I'm terribly old, but I never stop learning. You know, never stop grasping opportunities, never ever stop and sit back and think, oh, you know, I've done it, I'm comfortable. Always go for it, because you will discover that, you know, we're all young. As long as we stay young in heart and look for the opportunities. If you want to start a business in China, you know, I can't recommend a skill set. I know nothing about accounting. I know nothing about profits. I know nothing about tax, but I embrace things and I look to things that will give me the chance to explore my own abilities. I don't know. Maybe I'm crazy. Lots of people think I'm crazy, but never mind.
Not at all.
Don't get me started on this. It's highly boring and you'll have to sit there. But wine is very, very linked to a lot of things in Chinese poetry in particular, because, oh gosh, where can I stop? But alcohol is a very, very unique space in Asian culture, because it's not like the West. In the West, people drink as an everyday thing, and they drink because it was the only way to drink safe liquid. In the West, wine was added to water to make water safe. In the East, it's a totally different thing, because they were very smart and they discovered tea. And once you discover tea, you discover that boiling water kills diseases. So you don't need to drink alcohol to stay alive. So what it means is that in Asia, alcohol occupies this amazing space, which is about breaking down social barriers, which is about becoming friends, expressing your true self to each other. And that means it's a perfect area for literature to come in, because the art of poetry is about the art of expressing yourself, your own personal nature, who you are in the world. And alcohol just helps with that, doesn't it? So there are lots of poetry about that. If you are interested, I really recommend going to the Tang Dynasty Li Bai was a very famous poet who learned to express himself through alcohol. And then you can contrast him to Du Fu, which was a little bit more serious, and he didn't go drinking so much. But if you're really interested about wine, you know, from grapes, the real, what we call wine, I really recommend looking at some of the poetry of coming from the further west regions, pre-Tang or Sui dynasty, you know, very early on. There's a very famous poem there called 葡萄美酒夜光杯, which is about beautiful wine in the moonlit cup. So good luck with that. Start read, and also when you read the poetry, have a glass of wine next to you.
That's excellent advice.
I won't talk about poetry or anything like that. I think Fang covered that really well. But I think touching base on the relationships building, we have at least half in our panel here, relationships you can build over in China. Really proud to say that the four of us, I founded the Canadian Alumni Network in China, and we have over 16,000 alumni in China, plus 16,000 plus alumni. Anyone who studied in Canada and now is living in China. On this panel, you know, other than myself, with Fang Yi, our wonderful wine specialist, she's our senior member on the UBC organizing committee. Faze is actually our newly appointed representative for UBC alumni. Good job, Faze. And Joseph is and Faze is in Beijing, and Joseph is our UBC alumni representative in Shanghai. So this is a testament to the strength of UBC Asian studies, and it's great to see that the alumni are really growing in China, and we've seen many big events, a lot of engagement opportunities. Myself, if you're talking about paths that have not been charted, I never thought I would be an alumni relations specialist. I was trained in alumni relations, ended up working in an international school for, gosh, I think it was like almost maybe 5 or 7 years, something like that. I lost track of time. You live in China for such a long time, it just goes by you. I was there for over 20 years. So, and then I had to come back because I have a wife and 2 kids at the time. And now they're no longer kids, they're older now, which means I might look at that Thai opportunity to go teach abroad. But honestly, I just love Asia, which is why I'm always looking at, like Fang Yi said as well, young at heart, always looking at new opportunities and try and go for other things. I still volunteer for many things. I sit on various boards. I volunteer for the Olympics and the Paralympics. I do a lot of stuff in the world of heritage here in actually BC now. So I love this, what you can do with your understanding of Asian culture, Asian heritage, and apply it to every little thing in the world here, especially here on the West Coast. So I just want to give that shout out to you guys and for all, and I also want to thank all our UBC alumni representatives who volunteer their time to really connect our UBC alumni over in China and of course anywhere in Asia Pacific. So that's my spiel. Thank you.
I think one of the things that's actually very important is actually having, like in Asian studies, you develop a very strong cultural sensitivities. So you actually, when you build these relationships with your, say Japan, Southeast Asian, you get to know these people, you become more sensitive to the ways of doing business or actually operating in those markets. So that's something that the soft skill that you gain from experience, you gain from building relationships. And I think Asian studies helps you like populate that seed in your mind that certain countries are very different sometimes, and to be sensitive about that. And sometimes coming from Canada, you know, you may not get that experience. I think hopefully that Asian studies helps you formulate that people are different. They're same, but at the same time, you also be sensitive to their cultures. And I think you know, one of the things I want to echo, like Richard said, challenge yourself, right? I mean, like, I think put yourself in a, don't always be in a comfortable position. Challenge yourself, work yourself in a different market, a different culture, and then that's how you learn. That's how you grow. Don't always be in a comfortable position. Yeah.
I'm very surprised with your forward thinking because you said you are only a prospective Asian studies students. This means that you are thinking very much ahead. So to begin with, I would like to say that I highly agree with your approach of starting a career with a co-op or internship experience, because this will help you establish your network and try out different options before settling down and committing yourself to something long-term. As for how you can start looking for these things, there are actually different ways to do so. But the one approach I would definitely recommend you to do is to talk to your professors, especially those with a positive impression of you. Your profs at school, they are actually very resourceful people. They have been in their field for a very long time, long enough to know peers and alumni who are steps ahead of you. And some of them have empty spots waiting to be filled. Just to give you a very simple example, I actually very recently hired a Asian Studies graduate as one of the teachers at my school through the recommendation of a professor from the department. So the graduate turned out to be an extremely good fit. She's good at what she does. So as a result, everybody was happy. As for your concerns with COVID-19, yes, for the past year, it did make things more difficult. And there are a lot of places that are firing rather than hiring. However, with our modern technology, such as the Zoom we're using today, and everything else, I think, and also the introduction of the vaccine, although it's still kind of slow in its distribution, things are heading towards the better. So if you haven't declared your major yet, chances are by the time you hit fourth year, COVID may not be much of a problem, as we have already recovered from its economic consequences. So Tony, you're still very young, and I think you'll be okay. That would be my perspective on this.
I just wanted to add that I actually did do a co-op with my Asian Studies degree. And if anyone's considering that, I would highly recommend it because the UBC Arts co-op program is like really good. Like they say they're really good, but then after graduating and actually starting and joining the workforce, I realized like they were really, really good. It's a highly competitive program, but if any of you are in your first year or second year, you can apply to join the Arts co-op program for your second or third year. And when I joined the program many years ago, they had job postings in China, Japan, and Thailand. And then, of course, some in Europe, but they had some scattered job employments across Asia. So if anyone's interested, I highly recommend doing the co-op. I think you mentioned you were considering co-op and internship. Given the option, I'd say co-op is a bit better. But then there's also, of course, internship opportunities through the UBC Work Learn program as well.
These are great questions. I think it's a very important piece here for us. In my day, we didn't really have a really good co-op program, so I didn't have that chance. I sort of stood up and I created with my fellow graduates the Asian Studies Undergraduate Society, and we raised funds and all this stuff, and we learned a lot of those skills through that. But I think one of the things that I found through my time in China was as an Asian Studies graduate, you have your Asian competency skill sets. You're speaking the language, you're understanding the culture there. And then when I entered the business in the work force in China, one of the most interesting parts was working for the Swiss. I learned to be on time, but that's a soft skill. But I learned to work for this incredible Chamber of Commerce. And you might want to think about this as an opportunity to look at when you're still young, to look for boards of trade, chambers of commerces, because those are platforms where you have all their membership from different industries that you can explore as a young individual. And either you're an intern or you're a gopher, you're going for everything, or you're actually hired as an employee over there. You'll find that you're exposed to the elements, whether you're doing membership for that Chamber of Commerce, which then you'll actually see which, the various members that are out there. I became the business development and the, what do you call it, the deputy guy in charge of the chamber and public affairs, public relations director for the chamber. And I got a chance to establish relationships over there with heads of companies. One of the, and there was that engineer that was just on a moment ago, which I thought was very, kind of sparked something in my mind. I organized an event with Airbus and the CEO of Airbus in China. And what an incredible fascinating event that I put on there, inviting Airbus's contractors from Switzerland to fly over to China for 24 hours just for our event. That's ended up signing a contract to build the factory of that piece, that part of the Airbus in China instead of somewhere else. Quite fascinating that I'm not taking all this credit, but I'm just saying, you're an instigator, you're a catalyst, you're a bridge builder. Those are those opportunities that sometimes you may not have thought about or just kind of happens. Those are some of the unique experiences that I have to say were one of my fondest moments living abroad. Is you're creating difference and building those bridges and making things happen that you may not have thought I always think little me, how did I do that, right? You actually are someone who have that skill sets, that language. And if you're a bubbly person like I am, you like to put people together, it happens. You'll find interesting things that happen when you're in a place that you never thought you could do something. So never think you're going to go off. You should think about this. Always take the uncharted path. It's so much more interesting, and you'll look back and kind of go, wow, because I came back, gosh, I think it's now almost 7 years ago, and I look at my life over in China for 20 plus years. I think I may have lived several lifetimes having lived over there, and I will never trade that for anything, honestly. There's always a part of me that wants to go back, and all my friends who are here know that I fly back often, except for this last year, of course, but I fly back often, and I feel there's that connection to Asia that is going to be forever ingrained with me. And even though I'm here, I know that this COVID, this global pandemic will be over sooner than later. We just have to hang on for a little while longer. And I'm sure we'll be able to do great things. I know you guys are the next generation, and I look forward to hearing your stories in the next 5 to 10 to 20 years, whatever that, how long it's going to take. So anyways, I'm going to stop here. Thank you.
The time is going quickly, but I just want to say to all of you, with regard to work placement or internships, reach out. Don't be afraid. The worst thing that can happen to you is that you get ignored. But I usually try and have at least 2 to 3 interns working in our company in regular years. And most of the time, they're from students who have just reached out from me. People from my old universities, they've heard of me, and they just write to me. And I read what they say, and I'm like, yeah, come over. Let's have a chance. You say you want to come to Beijing, you want to know more about wine, come. If you have the language skills, we really welcome you. And if the worst happens, I look at this thing and I go, oh, I haven't got time to answer it. But that's the worst that can happen. Just do some research, go out there, put your name out there, write the email to the person, and don't be scared, because it might lead to something truly amazing and fun. I welcome everything. I love working online myself. And recently I've just had an internship student working for me in the UK because we were working on subtitles for my new television program. So they were dealing with wine knowledge, and they were learning about how to turn the English into Chinese. And we did a lot of projects like that. But of course, I really wanted a native English speaker so they could understand all the nuances. So there's an example. So yeah, we totally welcome it. I sit there and I wait for these students to come to me, because by approaching me, they're showing initiative. They're showing the ability to reach out. And that to me is the number one great thing that a student can show.
Yeah, of course. I mean, like, they like people that show initiative. They like people that are actually communicate well. Yeah, they are, and people that have unusual stories to tell. Maybe they've actually challenged themselves or like to work outside the comfort zone. And those are things that stand out: communications, challenge, and be able to storytell about the careers and their path. They don't have any set criterias, but I think they're always on lookout for talent. And I think the number one thing is actually to hire the right people. I think to Fanyi's point, reach out, challenge yourself, right? Go explore. I think, they are always looking for talent, whether it be coming from Canada or overseas. They like people that are international, have that East and West culture divide, the experience. And I think, to Richard's point, China is growing. Fanya, we know that this is the growth market. This is the growth engine for the next 10, 20 years. It's going to be China. And the opportunities here are enormous. So I'm actually the alumni rep for Shanghai. And I get a lot of emails saying, hey, how can we do interns? And I know a lot of different people in different industries. And that's how, I like to connect people. You want to do engineering? We have some engineering internships in these companies in China that's growing. We have a lot of Canadian companies that actually love to hire UBC and Canadian students because they know them, the background. So, and that's why reach out and come and live here in China. Be physically here. Online is great, but also be physically here to experience the culture. And that's very important. They like people to be there present in the country.
Wait a minute, Joseph. I'm the alumni rep in Beijing and I get no emails. What are you doing right? We need to share some notes here.
We had a pretty amazing Christmas dinner, right? I think we're the only city in the world that had a UBC alumni Christmas dinner.
All right, Fungi, we have to get on top of this in Beijing.
And we have a very passionate crowd. I think to Richard's point, connect with the trade council. Connect with we have BC Trade Council, Canadian Chamber of Commerce, other commerce network. Meet people, volunteer. I mean, a lot of even personally for myself, a lot of my connections I actually have met doing things that I'm passionate about, whether it be cycling or running. I started a running crew, and I met a lot of people that come and join and socialize through running. Be passionate. I mean, the passion will actually lead you to a lot of different roads that you will find interesting in your life, like wine.
Actually, Joseph, to your point, in terms of sports, if you have a sport that you love, you can get involved in those respective cities. Like I love baseball. I love softball. Yeah. I ended up running the softball league in Beijing, and the network that I created was incredible. That blew my mind. I couldn't believe I've met one of the coolest people I met, and I'll share this here on this panel because we're all Asian studies folks here, was, I don't think he's there anymore, but he was the translator at the US Embassy. And incredible guy. He's now moved on. I think I just saw him on his LinkedIn. He's got a new position, but incredible. He was in China for such a long time. But I met so many folks through that network. Of course, the Canadian Alumni Network, our UBC alumni. It's amazing the people you get to meet. If you play sports, you're gonna meet some folks who have that commonality with you. If you don't play sports, okay, no problem. There's no problem with that. It's just, I'm just sharing with you, like Joseph just said, the biking group that I see him all the time with his photos on social media. I think that's great that he has that. It's very active. I'm so jealous because you guys are doing that over in Shanghai, and I'm stuck in my pajamas here in BC. But it's wonderful. Yeah.
Richard, let me tell you a cool story to everybody. About 3 years ago, I think NHL wanted to enter China. And so they had exhibition matches in Shanghai and Beijing. And I think it was actually the Vancouver Canucks were coming to play the LA Kings. And they wanted a group of volunteers that speak Mandarin to show the Canucks around Shanghai. Right, so to actually to different locations in Shanghai, eating with them, connecting with them, talking about hockey, with all your hockey fans, right? You know, it was actually a very cool experience that you cannot, you know, in Canada, that would never happen, right? But in China, because they need someone to show them around, I volunteered and was able to meet a lot of cool Vancouver Canuck players in Shanghai. So these are experiences that will come up, and you know, having that language skills, having that cultural sensitivity, being in the right place, being passionate about sports, connecting with the trade council and embassy will afford you. I think when looking for a job, I mean, it's always good. I mean, one of the advantages that we have now is we have Asian Studies network of alumni they can reach out to. I mean, whether you have questions on your career path, type of jobs, where you want to be, people actually can ask you. And we're very, I mean, I hope that we're all very friendly and very inviting and very like responsive to help you. Nowadays, like the jobs can be online, virtual, working from different cities, but there's actually the things have changed. The COVID, the post-COVID economy, the new normal will be very different now. I think now, like you see a lot of corporations, they're actually going to think have more work from home, work virtually now, by like 5-10 years. So you're actually in a great place. I mean, but you know, that make that first move, reach out, find out what you want to do and how we can help you. As Fang Yi said, reach out first to Fang Yi, myself. Like living in China is even like also very different. I mean, for me coming to China, it took me 1 year to get used to living in China. It's very different from living in Hong Kong. So how we can help you accelerate that learning and to avoid our past mistakes. I mean, I think later on, Sophie will send all their LinkedIn contacts and reach out to us.